Welcome everybody. In this webinar. We're about to start. We'll give it a few minutes for people to join. Good morning, afternoon, and evening, wherever you are. We have a very exciting event coming up, so we'll be starting in 1 minute. All right, since we have a very full program, I'm going to get us started. So welcome everybody to this very important event today on youth, climate action, and the NDCs. This event is co-hosted by the NDC Partnership and UNICEF. And for those of you who don't know, the NDC Partnership is a global coalition of over 180 members, countries, and institutions that work together to drive transformative climate action in line with Sustainable Development Goals. We support countries on implementing their NDCs, or nationally determined contributions, national climate action plans, under the Paris Agreement. And we're also supporting the updating of the NDCs that's taking place this year. UNICEF is one of our recent members. They joined in February of this year, and we're very excited to have the global agency, expert agency on children and youth to be part of this coalition. Today's event is very timely because it focuses specifically on the integration of youth in the ongoing round of NDC updating that's currently ongoing. So we're going to be discussing how youth is already being integrated in NDCs and how countries and partners and also youth themselves can further strengthen the engagement of youth in the NDC process. So today's objectives are that we will be sharing insights from country requests that are received by the NDC Partnership on how countries are including youth in their NDCs and in NDC implementation. We'll be providing some guidance on how countries can include children and youth in the updated NDCs this year. And then we'll also highlight a few country case studies of successful integration and engagement of youth in the NDCs. So for today's agenda, we have a great lineup of speakers from UNICEF, from the Partnership Support Unit, and we have some youth representatives with us from Jamaica and Costa Rica that will be sharing their country stories. And I also would like to tell you that you can be using the Q&A function throughout the event, because we'll be leaving some time for Q&A at the end. So we'll be collecting your questions. So if anything comes up that you'd like to ask the panelists, please use the Q&A function and we'll be making sure to collect those questions. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Mr. Sanjay Wijesekera, the Director of Programs at UNICEF. It's a great honor. Over to you.
Thank you, Raylene. And well, it's an honor for me to be here and with you and all the youth participants, and really, yeah, wonderful to be here. And thanks also for all the participants for joining us today. And I'd like to thank the NDC Partnership for inviting UNICEF, but also all the partners to collaborate on this really important issue. So I'm going to be quite brief because I know there's a lot of a packed agenda, but just a few thoughts from a UNICEF perspective, and I have obviously colleagues here who will continue the discussion. But for us, and we strongly believe that children bear the biggest brunt of the impacts of climate change and environmental pollution, and these impacts threaten to undermine decades of progress on children's ability to survive, grow, and thrive. So, as you know better than I do, the climate crisis is the defining issue of our time, as our Secretary General said. Children and young people, and again, as I mentioned, you know best that you are the ideal agents of change for action on climate and environment. Children and young people worldwide have become key advocates and leaders in the movement for climate action and environmental rights, and are therefore exercising their right to participate. And our kind of humble contribution is to try and support and provide the right platforms for them to take forward their agenda. We launched a report, Are Climate Change Policies Child Sensitive? And that report highlights the need for climate policies to be informed by and provide for the systematic and meaningful consultation and participation of all children at every step of the climate policy-making process and at all levels. And the key principles and approaches identified in this paper can inform decision makers and other key actors on how to do this and contribute to the urgent efforts to tackle the climate crisis. As state parties to the Paris Agreement prepare to submit their updated NDCs, there's a need to mobilize commitments for inclusive climate action, which responds to the calls of children and youth around the world, considering their unique vulnerabilities, their rights, and their capacities as powerful agents of change. UNICEF and other partners, including YUNGO and the Children's Environmental Rights Initiative, also encourages countries, states to sign up to the Intergovernmental Declaration on Children and Youth in Climate Action. And in December 2019 at COP25, UNICEF, in collaboration with other partners, launched an Intergovernmental Declaration on Children, Youth and Climate Action, and it's been signed by 12 governments to date. And this is based on priorities identified by YUNGO and children across the world. It's a first kind of instrument of its kind, designed to accelerate inclusive and child and youth-centered climate policies at all levels, national and global, and to include explicit commitment to integrating children's rights and perspectives in NDCs. So UNICEF is committed to being led and inspired by young people on climate, energy, and environmental issues. While the only lasting solution is reducing emissions of carbon and other greenhouse gases, climate change is affecting children and young people now, and we must increase our efforts to build resilience. 2020 offers a key milestone in the global effort to fight climate change. Countries have the opportunity to assess their NDCs, reflect their highest possible ambition, and also to consider whether they could do more to contribute to collective efforts towards achieving the goals outlined in the Paris Agreement. The COVID crisis has presented us with a unique window of time and an unprecedented moment in our lifetime to reimagine what a new global social contract looks like. Together, we have the tools and experience to fight climate change. Together, we can harness science, evidence, and momentum to reimagine a more sustainable, greener, and fairer world for every child. Together, we can respond to this global child and youth-led movement by supporting, in their respective national contexts, youth engagement in NDC processes. So we stand ready to support you all as you do so. Thank you very much for this opportunity, and back to you, Regine.
So much, Sanjay, for that wonderful opening remarks. We're so glad to have UNICEF on board with the partnership. We look forward to working together even more on bringing youth and children into the NDCs and in NDC implementation. And thank you for your remarks. We're going to continue the next presentation, which is by Jamie Binden, Project Coordinator of Knowledge and Learning at the NDC Partnership Support Unit. She will be speaking to trends that we're seeing from countries' requests to the NDC Partnership on youth. Jamie, over to you.
Thank you, Raylene. As Raylene mentioned, the NDC Partnership is a coalition of countries and institutions, and today we will be taking a look at the trends in requests that we see from countries related to youth. One of the main functions of the NDC partnership is the development of partnership plans. And partnership plans are countries' NDC implementation plans. They are developed for coordination, resource mobilization, and tracking of climate action in countries. And so when we take a look at the partnership plans that have been analyzed, nearly half mention youth. About 2% of all partnership plan requests relate to youth. And you can see on the screen the countries that explicitly mention youth in their partnership plans. A total of 33 parties consider youth in their official documents. When we take a look at the breakdown of youth-related requests by focus area and by sector, we see that while most youth-related requests are cross-cutting, there is an overlap with the Afolu sector and, to a lesser degree, waste, water, oceans and coasts, and transport sectors. The 38 requests that mention youth relate mainly to the following other key topics: capacity building and education, coordination and stakeholder engagement, civil society and community-based management, and private sector engagement. And now we'll take a look at who is responding to these requests. While 32% of youth-related requests in partnership plans that are analyzed have been responded to by our partners, 44% have not been responded to yet, and 24% have only received indicative support. And you can see on the screen the partners who have, some of the partners who have responded to youth-related requests. A few examples of unsupported youth-related requests include Sao Tome and Principe, the elaboration of a national plan of environmental education and environmental education introduced in school textbooks starting in kindergarten, the Republic of the Marshall Islands, a seed fund to support youth entrepreneurship solutions for climate challenges and scaling up successful youth climate projects. In Jordan, capacity of the education sector to address climate change raised, building gardens in public schools using permaculture, and battery electric bikes deployed for use by university students. We'll also take a look at requests related to enhancement. The previous requests were focused on implementation, and as a part of the Climate Action Enhancement Package, also known as CAP, we also see requests related to NDC enhancement. CAP is a time-bound support package that assists members to enhance their NDCs and fast-track NDC implementation. So these next requests are focused on enhancement. So when we take a look at CAP requests, we see that a total of 18 requests from 11 countries relate to youth out of more than 1,000 requests. And youth are most frequently mentioned in requests that focus on stakeholder consultations, but they're also included in requests that relate to improving data and MRV systems, formulating long-term low greenhouse gas and resilient development strategies, and other types of requests. The trend in key topics of activities is similar to what we see in partnership plans when we look at CAP. And the CAP requests that mention youth relate primarily to the following other key topics: civil society and community-based management, coordination and stakeholder engagement, capacity building and education, equality and human rights, and gender and private sector engagement. And as with the implementation requests, most requests are cross-cutting in nature. And then when we take a look at unsupported CAP activities on youth, 5 of 18 requests are unsupported. All 5 are listed here. In the Dominican Republic, empower youth and women in aspects such as sustainable energy, productive education, livelihoods diversification, household economy credit, and inclusive opportunities. In Sudan, involvement of diverse stakeholders in the NDC updating process, including students. And in Jordan, involve youth in innovation for sustainable development through an NDC accelerator that provides equal opportunities to Jordanian youth to contribute to the processes of innovation and share their ideas. These were among the requests not fully supported through CAP, but members and non-members are still invited to follow up on these requests with their own resources. And when we take a look here at the overview of countries with youth requests, By source and focus, we can see in each column those who have requests in their partnership plan or request for support letter in the column on the far left. In the middle, those with requests in a climate action enhancement package request, so looking at enhancement. And on the far right, those who had made requests in both. Those with the blue star next to the name of the party are those who include unsupported requests, so those who are ready to do more on youth but require additional support. So they're ready to go, but just looking for some additional support in order to do so. So thank you so much. And I will hand it back over to Helene as we move forward with our presentations.
Thank you so much, Jamie. That was very insightful. Great to see the requests that countries have already made to the NDC partnership and the status of that. We will now move forward with the next presentation from UNICEF. So we have Amy Wickham, Program Specialist on Climate, Energy and Environment at UNICEF. She'll be speaking about the status of youth in the NDCs and also specific approaches to further strengthen youth engagement in the NDC updating this year. Amy, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Raleen. Hello, everybody. I'm Amy, working with UNICEF on climate, environment and DRR, and absolutely delighted to be here today and presenting to you and participating in this webinar. Next slide. So young people and children, as we all know, they are the ideal agents of change for climate and environment. Currently, nearly 160 million children live in areas of high or extremely high drought severity. Over 500 million children live in extremely high flood occurrence zones, and more than 1.7 million children under the age of 5 lose their lives every year as a result of avoidable environmental impacts, while millions more suffer disease, disability, and an array of other forms of harm, some of which can have lifelong effects. Next slide. When we consider these lifelong effects, you can see from the image here, these span from the more short-term immediate impacts such as mortality, physical harm, contaminated water, diarrhea, malaria, cholera, to the longer-term impacts such as undernutrition, migration, humanitarian emergency, loss of livelihoods, loss of opportunities and resources, all the way to the intergenerational impacts, including deprivations and perpetual cycles of poverty. Next slide. UNICEF conducted a study, Are Climate Policies Child Sensitive?, which found that only 42% of NDCs contained direct reference to children or youth. And as you can see from the requests and the slides that Jamie has just presented, this is obviously on the increase, which is fantastic. 11 of 13 NAPs explicitly refer to children or youth, with emphasis as a vulnerable group and as beneficiaries in terms of education and health. And 2020 offers an opportunity for change, and with the NDC revisions, which is what we're talking about today. Next slide. Engaging and empowering young people in climate policies. Why does it matter? Children and youth are the key stakeholders, and at the same time, they're among the most vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. Children and young people worldwide, particularly girls, have become advocates for climate action and environmental rights, and accordingly effectively exercise their right to participate. Governments have the opportunity to respond to this global child and youth-led movement by supporting, in their respective national contexts, youth engagement in NDC processes. Next slide. A positive example of this is something that Sanjay referred to in his remarks, and it is the Intergovernmental Declaration on Children, Youth and Climate Action. In December 2019, at COP25, UNICEF, in collaboration with other key partners, launched an Intergovernmental Declaration on Children, Youth and Climate Action, which is currently signed by 12 governments. The declaration is based on priorities identified by Youngo and children across the world, and as Sanjay mentioned, it's the first of its kind commitment to accelerate such inclusive child and youth-centered climate policies and action at national and global levels, including an explicit commitment to integrate children's rights and perspectives in NDCs. Next slide. So engaging and empowering young people in climate policies. What can we do? And I think we've already received a question in the Q&A, and I'm hoping that this will somehow start to address that, which is, these are some of the ideas. Conducting an assessment of the current NDC. Is the NDC ambitious and urgent? Is it rights-based? Is it holistic and multi-sectoral? And is it inclusive? So here you will see 3 screenshots of checklists that we have at the end of that policy report that I mentioned. The first one, which is all about the ambition of the policy. whether it's ambitious and urgent, rights-based, holistic and multisectoral and inclusive. And the following two checklists talk to the enabling environment and then also to the measurement targets and impacts, to the more specific details. Next slide. So what can we do? One idea is that we can develop an action plan to address the gaps highlighted from the assessment just mentioned above, covering areas including advocacy for NDCs to be child and youth inclusive, enhancing the ambition of the mitigation approaches and adaptation for children and youth, and ensuring meaningful youth participation and engagement in the NDC process. UNICEF and partners have been progressing this agenda through their role in the NDC Youth Task Force, and with thanks to our youth representative, Sarah Cognuk, contributions from UNICEF were made within the group and support was provided in the generation of global consultation, creation of stakeholder database, regional workshops, systemization and analysis of this data from the global consultation. And we're excited for this youth engagement plan and believe that it will be a great platform to bring these plans to reality. Next slide. To go into a little bit more detail about the 3 points that I've just raised, the first one on advocate for NDCs to be child and youth inclusive. One such way of doing this is mapping the key child and youth centered words in the country NDC. Is this substantive? Is it passive or is it absent? And in the cases where it's absent or passive, one could develop the case for substantive inclusion. Next slide. An example of doing this could be conducting an assessment of the impact of climate, energy, and environment on children and ensuring that this data is integrated into the NDC. And an example of such an assessment is the report that UNICEF conducts called A Climate Landscape Analysis for Children, a CLAC. On the second point, next slide, enhancing the ambition of mitigation approaches and adaptation for children and youth. One could map climate action in sectors crucial to the well-being of children and young people. Are these ambitious mitigation and adaptation measures? Do they protect children and young people from the impacts of climate change? And if not, it's possible to develop a proposed listing of approaches. Next slide. What that proposed listing could look like could incorporate language that has sector-specific proposed targets, both mitigation and adaptation across the various sectors of social policy, nutrition, health. Next slide. Water sanitation, education, disaster risk reduction, and child protection. And this is one way that you could enhance the ambition of mitigation approaches and adaptation by providing such recommendations to governments. Next slide. On point 3, ensuring meaningful youth participation and engagement in the NDC process. An idea to do this would be mapping youth participation and engagement in the NDC process to date. Is the NDC informed by, does it provide for consultation and meaningful participation of all young people of different ages, gender, and social backgrounds? And if not, similar to the last 2 points, there's room to conduct such an assessment and conduct a meaningful youth participation engagement in the NDC process. How to design an engagement approach? Here are some ideas. Mapping organizations involved, mapping existing platforms and tools to design a strategy. And here I have linked a document which has already conducted quite a comprehensive mapping of both organizations and existing platforms and tools to get started. Next slide. A very specific example which applies for UNICEF in this regard is through the tool of UReport, which is a social messaging tool and data collection system developed by UNICEF to improve citizen engagement, inform leaders, and foster positive change. And UNICEF has used UReport together with partners in many occasions on climate, environment, and disaster risk reduction engagements, and it has been very successful. Last but not least, next slide. I wanted to draw your attention to an NDC with a child focus, which is the country example of Vietnam. And the full updated NDC can be linked, is linked in the document there. I've just noticed the typo, sorry, it's Vietnam. It includes a dedicated section on children. It acknowledges particular vulnerabilities of children. It has a very strong equity angle, recognizing children with disabilities, children in poor families, migrant children, and girls and those in the Mekong Delta region. And the NDC also has a strong component of disaster risk reduction within climate change adaptation, community-based models, and the need for communication and awareness raising. Next slide, please. Here is also a checklist. And just to note that this is not final and we are still open to receiving feedback, but it's looking at the sectors and acknowledging the particular vulnerabilities of children and young people across each of the sectors within the NDC to assess whether this is substantive, whether children feature, and whether they're incorporated across each of these sectors. Next slide. The following 2 slides are just some existing platforms and some tools, followed by some resources, which hopefully will be supporting all of those who want to be engaged in this process. Thank you very much. Over for me.
Thank you so much, Amy, for a very insightful presentation. Very helpful approaches and examples of how we can actually include youth and children in the NDC. So thank you for sharing that. I hope it was helpful for everyone. We will now move to the very exciting part of this session, which is the country case studies. And we will start with Jamaica. We will be hearing from Danelyn Swaby, who is a communication practitioner, a podcaster, the Jamaican ambassador for the Virtual Island Summit, and also a postgrad student in global communication development. She'll be sharing with us how Jamaica, who very recently submitted a more ambitious NDC, has included young people in this process and what were the outcomes of this. Danelyn, it's such a pleasure. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Eileen, and I want to say good morning to everyone who is in attendance. And right, so as I was reflecting on the presentations, I just wanted to consider, I'm very proud of the fact that we've, submitted as a country the updated NDC. After review though, interestingly, it does not explicitly mention youth, but I do think that the saving grace is that we have made a concerted effort, or the National Focal Point for Climate Adaptation and Mitigation have made concerted effort to engage youth. So prior to the year-long update process, there was a series of in-country engagements. So this was a post-COP youth consultation on climate change, and that of course was in recognition, considering intergenerational equity and understanding that young people have a very important role to play as it relates to NDC processes. So a lot of Jamaican youth were, prior to that process, were not familiar with what the NDCs are. And I think it was the intent of the climate change division, therefore, to create engagement sessions that would massage that process, expose young people to what the NDCs are and why it is important that young people should play a role. And it's also important for me to highlight that these sessions were actually organized by young people. So the planning and the consultation, the coordination process, that was the responsibility of youth advocates and youth networks with support from key organizations, as I mentioned before, the Climate Change Division, and also I want to acknowledge the role of the UNDP in that process as well. And these consultation processes engage young people from both ends of the island, and it was also important that rural young people were included, because one of the concerns as it relates to youth engagement, there's always this rural-urban divide, and persons in remote areas being left out of the conversation. So that was very important. Can we go to the next slide if possible? Right, so the consultation, as you can see, was dubbed Engaging Youth in Climate Conversations for a Resilient Jamaica. And the objectives, as I already highlighted, was to include young people in critical conversations and decisions regarding climate change and response, and to discuss the outcomes of the climate change debates and negotiations, which frames the context for NDC processes and country responses. Because in addition to young people not previously being included in these conversations, it's almost like whenever we have representatives and delegations heading to these global international conferences, usually the general public were not really engaged, even though of course you could argue that you have the media and the reportings. We need to find other deliberate means of, informing people what goes on behind these closed doors and these important meetings, because I think it really sends the message of collective partnership. So everybody working at multiple levels to ensure that there is action, there's implementation on the ground. So it was very important, and I do recall the focal point playing a very active role in highlighting the steps that it takes to get to that level, what's discussed, and what the outcomes and the desired actions look like after these discussions are had in an international setting. And also importantly, youth got the opportunity to connect with a lot of organizations that are working in climate change, which means that they were offered opportunities to be a part of further projects, and also just to meet people and to have mentors that they know where to go to when they have community level implementations and other projects that they'd want to run with as it relates to climate action. And of course, this formed a platform for young people to build on the engagement, and also a space for greater collective efficacy, to know that there are so many other young people who are interested in participating in climate action, and that sense of belonging kind of heightened the sense of purpose, and also to know that they have a direct connection to policymakers within that space. So that was very important. And I have some highlights of what went on at these respective processes. These are still photos, unfortunately, but I'd also want to share with everybody in attendance that I happen to be present at these engagement sessions, and I do know that there was a very dynamic structure. So outside of the information sharing component, the young people were apprised before of what would happen. So there were also poster depictions, dramatizations, where young people incorporated their solutions and their recommendations as to how they want to be engaged, what are the strategies that they would like to take as young people to contribute to mitigation and adaptation solutions in their communities. And of course, I think that is something that sent a very powerful message. I know we've been speaking in this forum and other forums, not just about the recognition of young people as important stakeholders, but that young people have the ideas, they have the know-how, and they have the willingness to really contribute substantively to these processes. And I think just by the series of panel discussions that were had, the questions that were asked, and the different activities that were had throughout the day really underscored that young people were committed, and a lot of them really wanted opportunities to really be a part of these important processes. So the exposure was good, and it highlighted the need that there is more, there's a greater need for this kind of engagement. So that's one of the takeaways, that a lot of times we have sessions like this, not necessarily NDC focused, but they're normally like one-off consultation sessions. The focal point, the CCD, the youth advocates, and others present in the rooms recognize that we need to really take the engagement outside of consultation processes only, but to get young people more active on the ground. So that was a takeaway for all the stakeholders who attended these sessions. Next slide. Right, I'm not sure. I really wish that we had available the more dynamic photos and presentations, but I rest assured that these things did happen. That's me, in case anybody doesn't recognize. But like I said before, it was very dynamic. And so one of the important things that came out of these consultations, which is very encouraging, is a precedent that it set. As I mentioned before, I realized that the updated document does not explicitly refer youth, but I'm happy to say that what we have is a welcome case where, even though it's not reflected in text, the action is there. So even following from this consultation, youth have been included in other processes. We've seen where young people who are doing research in different spaces as it relates to climate action and innovation have been invited to present and to collaborate with different organizations who are working in the different adaptation and mitigation spaces. So that is something that is encouraged. We have the Jamaica Youth Climate Change Council, one of the more active youth organizations that are doing the work at the community and national level. They have put on a series of expos and engaged other young people who are not able to be a part of this process, and it's just about increasing the fold and the membership. And even recently, through this year, they were able to access some funding from the CCD to implement a project, but that has been set back. You can go to the next slide. That has been delayed because of COVID. But what has happened, the CCD has made certain allocations under stakeholder engagement when it comes to the actual implementation of the NDC. So whereas youth are not explicitly mentioned under stakeholder engagement, young people have an opportunity to access resources and to be supported by the CCD. And also I want to mention, as I may have said it before, the UNDP as it relates to NDC implementation. I know recently the UNDP has issued a GEF small grant, so that's up to $50,000 US in funding as it relates to adaptation and mitigation projects. Why this is important is that the Jamaica Climate Change Youth Council, stemming from these consultation processes, they had some community level trainings in rural communities, and grant proposal funding, I know, was one of the key areas that they targeted, because it's not only important for us to be mobilized as it relates to awareness, but how can we advocate formally in documents and present convincing cases of representing what are the local climate scenarios so that we can really push for funding. So that is a call that has been reverberated in the Jamaican community, young people being equipped, you know, having certain capacities to write proposals and also to advocate for policy. That is something else that has been pushed. I also want to mention briefly that I recently completed research on youth and climate engagement in Jamaica, and that is something that was reflected both by young people and both by organizations, that there is greater support and involvement that is required for young people as it relates to policy, being aware of policy and being able to advocate for policy. And just a lot of work to be done as it relates to access to financing. So it's a step in the right direction as it relates to the national focal point being able to provide or making commitments for greater resource allocation, meaning technical assistance and support, and also financial support, so that we have more young people joining the fold. I do think, as I said, it's encouraging, but we need that to be widely replicated, especially where there are marginalized communities. I want to just throw quickly to Amy's presentation mentioned about, you know, the child being, you know, the inclusion of child sensitive climate policies and also looking out for the vulnerable communities. And that is something that I was able to be exposed to through the research, where a lot of times the vulnerable groups are inadvertently excluded, and there are a lot of other complicated barriers, even the deaf community. That was a significant finding from that research. So I think it's very important in the scope of this discussion how there are so many levels and subsets of vulnerable groups, and that's something that I think is an opportunity to rescope and to include in the actual implementation processes. But overall, we are encouraged by the initiative that the CCD has taken in trying to actively include young people in the planning and coordination and a lot of the adaptation and mitigation solutions that they have going forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dainlin. That was wonderful. It's so great to hear from an actual country case study. And I think it's also an important message that not everything is what it seems, because maybe youth as a word is not in this text, but look what's happening behind the scenes. There's so much going on, and it's very impressive that there's actually dedicated resources already allocated. So that's a win, I would say. So excellent job. Thank you for your presentation, and congratulations to Jamaica and the Jamaican youth for this success.
Thank you.
We're going to move to the next country case study. We will have Costa Rica. Natalia Gomez Solano from Costa Rica will be speaking. She is a climate change adaptation passionate technical assistant in adaptation planning and capacity building, also a research assistant in soil hydrology, an environmental engineering student, and also co-founder and coordinator at the Youth and Climate Costa Rica Network. Natalia, over to you to share with us how Costa Rica is including youth in the ongoing NDC updating process.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Raylene. I really appreciate this opportunity from the NDC Partnership and also from UNICEF. Thank you for this space, because I think that this space is really important to share experiences. So now I'm going to talk about how the youth have been integrated into the NDC updating process in Costa Rica. And I want to clarify from the beginning that this presentation is just like a little part of a whole process where many people have been involved, and also many efforts from many people and from my colleagues also. So next slide, please. So first of all, I want to present you the Youth and Climate Change Costa Rica Network, because I think that it's a really new effort. And well, we created the Youth and Climate Change Costa Rica Network on October 2019. So it's just like less than a year, but I think that what is an advantage is that we were like many dispersed people that were doing things and that wanted to do things, and then at that moment we get together and we are organized in 5 teamworks that have different thematics. So we work in terrestrial ecosystems, marine ecosystems, solid waste management, mobile sustainable mobility, and our objectives are, first of all, to integrate youth climate action efforts in Costa Rica to execute environmental actions and projects at national and subnational level, and strengthen and develop capacities in climate change of the members. And we work in 4 axes. So we work based on education, advocacy, activism, and research. And next slide, please. So first of all, I want to talk to you about the Costa Rican background. So because youth engagement and the NDC is a result of different youth commitments and also opportunities that were happening at different steps. So last year we have the local conference of youth, where actually we had the support from UNICEF and also from the Costa Rican government. And actually at that moment was when as many people, but we got together and we decided to create the network. And also we had the opportunity to have a Costa Rican joint delegation at the COP25, where Sarah and my colleagues had like a very important participation. And also I think that there was like a big participation in the declaration that Amy talked before. And also I want to mention the Costa Rican public policy of the young person, because it is part of the agenda of the Youth Vice Ministry in Costa Rica, and it says specifically, or it mentions specifically, climate change and youth, and that we need to work into climate action. So the NDC youth engagement is a result of many different steps, including this. Next slide, please. Well, I don't have like real pictures. I just have like a screenshots of virtual of now the virtual life, right? So this is like a picture of the first virtual workshop that we have in the participation as key stakeholders in the updating process of the Costa Rican NDCs. Now the NDC updating process is composed by 2 phases. The first phase is based where the methodology of the NDC from Costa Rica is based in a scenarios co-building methodology. So there are many stakeholders, including us as youth, and we are creating scenarios. We are co-building scenarios that then will fit, and the NDC will be based on those scenarios. So in this first phase, we are like in a general process where many people or stakeholders, experts from different sectors got together. Also with you, we are at the same level, and we start thinking about how would be the Costa Rica of 2050. So that's the methodology. And in this first phase, we were participating, but also I want to emphasize that we are not just a subject of consultation, because we are not just in a consultation process, we are in the co-building of the scenarios for NDC updating process. So we are giving supports, we are giving inputs at the same level of experts. And next slide, please. Well, also here is what I already said, that we are participating in the co-building of scenarios for Costa Rican NDC updating. And there were 4 workshops, around 10 young people participate from the Youth and Climate Change Costa Rica Network. And also, well, I want to clarify that, as I already said, that we are not just being consulted, that we are being part of the development of the scenarios that will fit into the NDC. And for us, this process have been really important, because perceptions from youth are very different from those perceptions from the people that are already experts. And if we think about 2050, well, now I am 22. At 2050, I'm gonna be 52, so I'm gonna be an adult on 2050. And the youth of today will be the adults of tomorrow. So we will be in charge of taking decisions of tomorrow and of facing the worst impact. And now, so you are the adults of today, and the decisions maker are delegating us a word. So we want to be part of the decisions that are taken today, because that will influence of our tomorrow. And that's really important, because we during the process we have seen how the perceptions are really different. So next slide, please. Okay, and I want to clarify, I totally forgot that the second phase of the NDC updating process is based in a sectorial level. So at the first, number one, we had a general level, imagine a Costa Rican 2050 in general, but at the second phase, we have like different scenarios for different sectors. And there we as youth are also participating. So now I want to talk about the key points on youth engagement from the process in Costa Rica and what really helped us and what is happening now. Because the updating process is happening now. It just started on August. So at this point, I don't have like a concrete document or concrete indicators of the whole process, but we are working on that. So first of all, a key point is that participation in NDC updating scenarios building workshops with stakeholders. So we already participated in phase one, which was the general, and we had 10 youth participating, but then we have that phase two, which I already said that is at the sectorial level, and there are around 19 youth participating in various sectors, and we are starting that process actually next week. So there are a group of scenarios created for the agriculture, forestry, and land use sector. Then a group of scenarios created for the energy sector, for the waste management. So we will be thinking at sectorial level, how do we imagine the Costa Rica of 2050? And after that, those scenarios will fit the NDC. And okay, also another key point is the key cross act. And last, the slide before, please. I didn't finish. No, the next one. Yeah, there. So the second point is the key cross actions. I want to tell you that now, actually on this Saturday, we have a youth training in NDCs for phase number 2 workshops. And the big question is, how can we, the youth, contribute in the NDC updating workshops at phase 2 sectorial level? Because we want to strengthen capacities, and also we know that a participation process is more valuable when all the people have the same knowledge, and we know exactly where we are. So we are having that youth training. And also another key point on youth engagement is the Costa Rican Youth and Climate Change Network serves as a platform for the integration of young people from other different youth organizations. So at this phase 2, it's not the Costa Rican Youth and Climate Change network participating in the NDC updating process. We also have participation from other youth-led organizations and sectors that are related to climate action in the NDC process, because know that climate actions goes beyond just one organization, and we know that the process would be more richer if there are more participation from different organizations. So next slide, please. Okay, and then one of our key points is the communication and connections. I would say that in Costa Rica we are in a really privileged, because we have political will for youth engagement in climate action, and also we have a youth peace ministry that gives us active support for youth engagement in different spaces, and also we have a key support from UNICEF and support in the opening of spaces for youth participation in processes from the Climate Change Directorate, from the Ministry of Environment and Energy. Now we have like a big support from the government officials, so we know that the Costa Rican Youth and Climate Change Network is like a focal point and a line of the Costa Rican government. And we have like a close connection with them. So I think that that's like a very, very advantageous. And also, well, we are building on previous experiences that is part of our background, as the opening from the government to integrate the Costa Rican youth delegation at COP25, the support for the local conference of youth development in Costa Rica during the COP from the government and UNICEF. And I think that those steps or those activities or those big processes are really help us on what are we now, because what are we now depends totally on what happened before, and we are in a continuous process. And well, that's all from my side. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Natalia. It's so impressive how Costa Rica is taking on such a comprehensive process and engaging youth at so many levels. So this concludes our country case studies. We have only 10 minutes left of this event. So we're going to do a very short Q&A session because we received a few questions from the audience. So the first question that we received was from, actually several people asked this: how can youth participate in the establishment of NDCs at the national level? So we will now go to the panel, and I'll ask maybe Dana-Lynn to answer this, because you have done this in your country. How can youth get engaged in their countries?
Right. Thanks for that question, Raylene, and for everybody who submitted it. I think one of the most straightforward processes for young people to get engaged is to be a part of networks. And I say that because when it comes down to you needing to access resources and you needing to access other kinds of technical support, I think it's very much easier for you to mobilize in groups and to receive that help to actually make change in the areas that you want to. So I think the best thing for young people who want to be involved is to just do a sort of stakeholder mapping, or just looking at what active networks exist in your country, exist in your spaces, and be a part of that process. Even if it seems dormant, surely the energy and the willingness that you are bringing can certainly bring some change around. So using that, being a part of these networks, I think is going to be a stronger force in terms of engaging policymakers and engaging people who are, you know, at the front lines as well of the NDC process.
Thank you so much, Dana-Lynn. Yeah, I think for every country it is different, but definitely just get engaged, try to find those networks. I think that's a great suggestion. Then I have one more question. How do we address the fact that NDCs are not legally binding? How do we ensure that youth are listened to and their demands are acted on despite their potential lack of political power and wealth? I would like to ask Amy from UNICEF to answer this question.
Thank you, Raylene. I'll definitely address the second half of the question for now, and if you'd like, I can hand it back to you for the first part of it. But just to say, you know, what we can do is encourage governments. We can encourage them on the need to engage youth, the importance of their role in climate policies, and in particular NDCs. Specifically, and support them with key ideas and approaches in order to do so. And I think this was touched on in Natalia's slides just now, just the really strong combination in the case of Costa Rica, where there was the combination of political will, enabling environment at Ministry of Environment, support from key organizations, interest and capacity of youth. So there's quite a few things to consider, but I think it's a matter of being positive, optimistic, and then solutions focused in terms of how we address the second part of that question. Thank you.
Yeah, I think on the first part, maybe just one thing to ask, or one thing to add, is that NDCs are actually taken very seriously. So I wouldn't get stuck with the fact that they are not legally binding. Countries are actually translating this into very concrete things on the ground, including legally binding policies at the national level. So I would definitely not underestimate how important they are and how serious countries are taking them. And we see that through the NDC partnership, with 65 countries engaged to update their NDCs with our support. This is taken very seriously. So engaging as youth in this process will definitely have results. I have one final question before we go to the closing remarks by Pablo Vieira. But I'd love to hear from our panel very briefly, if you can make one top recommendation to leaders that are in charge of updating their country's NDCs. What would it be? Jamie, you first.
I think I would say that young people have valuable insights to share, and that their voices are they're loud because they're passionate and they care, and that the value that they add as young people is so important. And so to not leave them out of the conversation, because bringing them to the table enriches the process, and it's not a burden, but an added value.
Thank you. Natalia, your one-liner.
Well, my recommendation would be don't ignore us, because we have really valuable perceptions, and we have valuable experiences, and we can help to the process. So please don't ignore us. When any young person get close to you, don't ignore us, because we know that you have like a very busy work and many things going on. But please take us as experts, or well, not as experts, but as important persons with important inputs.
Amy.
Great, thank you. My final words on this would be just to act now. Why wait? The climate crisis is going to impact children and people for decades to come, and it's imperative that their voices, their needs and their rights are considered in national climate policies and in their NDCs.
And last word to Danelin.
Hello?
Yes. Do you have any final words on what what the leader should do, including youth? And then we'll move on.
I think, and I'm just gonna, I want to say, and I mean, really, certainly you'd have known that I've been consumed with the research from before, so I'm not even giving my opinion. When I say this, I'm happy to hear from young people who have engaged within my country that are saying that they need to be done with tokenistic engagement, which comes from sometimes including people once and having a lack of, follow-up and sustained action. So when we have more of the follow-up and the sustained action, then young people will believe that they are truly being taken seriously and will, of course, be more substantively engaged.
Thank you so much. Thank you for all our speakers, our panelists. We'll now move to the closing remarks. It's my great honor to announce Pablo Vieira, the Global Director of the NDC Partnership Support Unit, who will officially close this event with his remarks. Pablo, over to you.
Thank you very much, Raylene, and thank you to all of you. All the speakers today have been impressive and inspiring. So I'm very, very happy to be part of this event and to have spent the last hour listening to incredible things. So thank you and everyone else for joining this event. The NDC Partnership is a global coalition of countries and institutions that are working together to drive truly transformational climate action, while also driving sustainable development in countries. And of course, climate action is an essential part of protecting the livelihoods of youth for the future generations. We support countries to accelerate the implementation of their national climate plans, or NDCs, and to raise ambition over time in line with the goals of the Paris Agreement. The partnership now has grown to over 180 members and continues to grow. We have currently 112 member countries, including around 90 some developing countries, 42 institutional members, and 29 associate members that represent non-state actors. And through our work, members leverage the resources and expertise to provide developing countries with the tools they need to implement their NDCs in an effective way and to combat climate change, to build a better future for them and for everyone else. So the partnership is keen on youth engagement because our work in member countries has shown already that engaging youth adds value to the development and implementation of NDCs, as it has been presented today. We therefore very much support the engagement of young people in the updating and enhancement of NDCs this year, so that responsive NDCs that consider the needs and rights of children and youth are developed effectively. This is even more important now, as NDCs are more than just a climate action plan. Countries are increasingly linking their NDCs with their development plans, with their national budgets, and are now using them to support a greener recovery, a more sustainable recovery from the COVID crisis. We have a responsibility to ensure that the economic recovery is shaped in ways that put us on a more sustainable development pathway. and that will require the involvement of the younger generations. The decisions being made this year will have profound implications for the kind of society that today's young people will inherit in the near future. So including youth in the conversation is therefore integral to shaping that future. Today, we heard from our partner and institutional member, UNICEF, on how climate policies are not yet addressing children and young people well enough, while climate change will significantly affect them through their lifetimes. We also heard from UNICEF the call to action and concrete approaches to engage and empower young people as part of NDCs in 3 different ways. First, making NDCs child and youth inclusive. Second, enhancing the ambition of mitigation and adaptations of NDCs under the Paris Agreement. And third, ensuring meaningful youth participation in the NDC processes, both in the design of the NDCs and in the implementation of the NDCs. We also heard from my colleague at the support unit of the partnership on the trends we are currently seeing in terms of country requests on youth as received by the partnership to date from countries. While gaps in support remain and more can still be done, and we're working very hard to cover those gaps, we can also celebrate the important work already ongoing by our member countries and partners. For example, in Burkina Faso, the country is conducting consultations with youth in the revision and enhancement of their NDC across priority sectors, including agriculture, environment, energy, and health. This initiative is being supported by UNDP and is a great example. Also, in the Republic of Marshall Islands, they are taking the lead in setting up a Pacific Arts and Climate Change program for and with youth. And finally, in Nepal, the country is organizing public forums and meetings with youth and other civil society groups to gather ideas and inputs for the NDC revision and implementation process. This work is being supported also by another partner, Climate Analytics. And importantly, today we hear from youth representatives of 2 very active members of the NDC partnership. And we're very proud of what we heard today, Costa Rica and Jamaica. Costa Rica also as a co-chair of the partnership. Their examples were illustrative of the collaborative and impactful partnership between young people and their governments that the NDC partnership represents. In these countries, young people are part and parcel of NDC enhancement and implementation processes, setting an important example that other countries can follow. And listening to young people from around the world, I believe that we must still do more to include them in our joint fight against the climate crisis. One that young and future generations will have to live with, and for which they are rightfully becoming more vocal every day. We should recognize the impact of climate change on youth, as well as their role as positive agents of change, as this has been said repeatedly today, and empowering them to act with us now. This is an intergenerational challenge, and only an intergenerational partnership for the NDC implementation and updating can ultimately promote success. The partnership is committed to meaningful engagement with young people, and we are well positioned to do so globally. Therefore, based on country demand and partner support, the NDC partnership is currently developing a youth engagement plan led by our co-chairs, Costa Rica and the Netherlands. The NDC Partnership Steering Committee established a youth task force in the steering committee of this year, in spring, which guided a youth-led process, very quick one, but very active one, to develop this youth engagement plan, consulting with over 500 youth from 80 countries across all regions. After providing and approving this strategy, the NDC Partnership Steering Committee later this year, just in a couple of weeks during the next steering committee, the plan will be launched publicly and help the partnership's more than 180 members engage youth actively in NDC implementation and ambition raising for the next foreseeable future. We hope that this youth engagement plan sets the stage for young people to actively engage in building climate ambition at the global scale. I look forward to working with you on scaling these tangible efforts and do much more with youth around the world through the NDCs. Thank you very much and congratulations for this great event.
Thank you so much, Pablo, and thank you everyone for this great event indeed. Goodbye.